Coming off a President's Trophy win and an MVP season from Connor Hellebuyck, expectations are high in Winnipeg. But with the departure of Nikolai Ehlers and some looming questions about the roster, what level should expectations really be at? This is the 2025-26 Deep Dive on the Winnipeg Jets. Hello and welcome to team number 7 on my preseason power rankings. We have the Winnipeg Jets, and coming off a President's Trophy win and another MVP season, actual MVP season from Connor Hellebuyck, but another season where he was, arguably the most important player in the NHL. Expectations Winnipeg are clearly high, right? This team is clearly a team that's in, championship contention, and wants to be taken seriously. But there is some legitimate concerns with this team. The first one, and the one that gets brought up the most, obviously, is the consistent shortcoming of Connor Hellebuyck in the postseason. And this is a goalie who's obviously been, the best goalie in the NHL for the last 4 or 5 years. But the questions about his playoff, resume is legitimate. I mean, his numbers in the playoffs are what they are now over, a very lengthy period of time. And it's definitely a concern when your best player can't show up, right? Like the Toronto Maple Leafs have had this discussion for years now with their core, and it's certainly a discussion that needs to be had about the Winnipeg Jets. But to me, the biggest question on this team is obviously the second line center spot, right? Like they bring in Jonathan Toews this summer, and that was obviously the big, homecoming get for them was Jonathan Toews, but you're bringing in a player who hasn't played in a couple of years and is definitely not in his prime anymore. And if the expectation is for him to be the 2C, I'd have reservations about that. But we'll dive into that more at the forward core. Overall, though, there is also some pieces on the Jets that I still really, really like. And that's what makes them a very interesting team for me, because there is these legitimate concerns, but there's also the combination of some young players who might be able to step up and take over some of those spots, or just the fact that they have some players on this team that I think are pretty underrated. And obviously they lose Nikolai Ehlers, who, if you've followed me for any length of time, know that I'm a massive Nikolai Ehlers fan. But they've been able to weather storms like that before, and I'm curious to see how they kind of navigate the next 6 to 7 months as a managerial team, trying to, not only replace his production, but also just improve this team from where they were. We jump into the rankings here, and 9th in offense, 13th in defense, 1st in goaltending, 15th in special teams, and 4th in coaching culture. For me, the Jets have obviously established a really long track record with their culture here, right? And it's been a team that has obviously Kevin Cheveldayoff's been there forever, and he's been the conductor of this ship for its entire existence. And in some cases that may be seen as a bad thing. I mean, it's been a massive tenure for him, but in another way, he's really been able to build this team how he wanted to, right? He's had full control. Every single player on this team, he has brought in. He has been the reason why that player is on this team. And it does put a lot of pressure on him as a manager, because if it doesn't work out, the leash is going to get, shorter. But obviously, President's Trophy win, an MVP season from Connor Hellebuyck, you think that he's sitting pretty at the moment. And Scott O'Neill obviously had a stellar season last year. He was phenomenal, and I really think he got the most out of what this team was supposed to be. I think that they reached what their peak was last season, at least in regular season wise. Obviously, when the President's Trophy, but I think in terms of their play style and their numbers, I don't think this team could have been much better than what they were. As for the offense and defense, obviously, not having a second line center, the departure of Nikolai Ehlers hurts them, but overall they still have Scheifele and Connor, who are two of the best offensive forwards in the NHL. Gabe Vilardi I really like. The depth on this team is intriguing. So, still a top 10 offense. They're closer to 10th than they were last year. The blue line, same thing. I think it has some issues, especially the bottom pair, but the top 4 on this team, the top 3 really is strong. And obviously in net, Connor Hellebuyck just kind of gets this group to be a number one spot just by default, essentially, because he's been overwhelmingly the best goalie in the NHL the last couple of years. Special teams are about middle of the pack, and they have been for quite a while. But it's been like this team winning the President's Trophy is definitely the cap for them, like in terms of where I think they can go. Like I don't think that's going to be the case this year, just based on what they've lost and how they added to it. But I still think you're looking at a very, very strong team here overall. We look at the coaching staff and the management team. Kevin Cheveldayoff, like I said, I think has done a good job in his time here in Winnipeg, but it's hard for me to put him anywhere higher than a B+, because and even that might be a little generous, because like I said, he's been here for the entirety of this rebuild, right? Like he's been here through the whole thing, and they have the one Western Conference Final appearance where they got smacked by Vegas. And, aside from that, there really hasn't been a ton of postseason success, right? This is a team that, that's made the second round. They made the second round last year. But it's been a lot of first round exits. It's been a lot of, disappointment in terms of, the expectation compared to where they've been. There's been quite a bit of turnover in terms of their stars. I don't know, I can't put him higher than that, because there hasn't been, the body of work isn't there, right? He's been consistent in terms of getting the Jets to be a playoff team, and that's better than, a lot of the GMs in the NHL. I think if you gave most of the GMs in the NHL 15 years to make the playoffs as many times as Kevin Cheveldayoff did, most of them wouldn't be able to do it, just straight up. Especially in Winnipeg, right? A market where, there is significant hurdles that you have to get over in terms of bringing players in, right? There's been very few players who have been willing to waive no trade clauses or discuss contracts with the Jets, and that's certainly been a disadvantage to him. But at the same time, they've had very intriguing prospect groups, and it seems like a lot of their guys just kind of fizzle out or don't end up making the team, right? I think Villahinola is kind of the big one that's on the team still, that just really never got a shot to be a significant player on this team, and it seems like his career now has just kind of fizzled out. Sammy Niku is another one that comes to mind immediately, and then now you have guys like Brad Lambert, who doesn't look like he's he has an outside shot to make the team at this point, but we'll see, right? And so it's interesting in terms of his prospects. I think people like their drafts every time they draft. I think people are always coming away from the Jets drafts being like, yeah, that was a solid draft. But you look at the roster right now, and it's very much rolling over the same lineup over and over again, and there's no real next wave of players coming up. So just it's something to kind of keep in mind as we go through this here. As for Scott O'Neill, like I said, I think that he really surprised me last year. He had a very good year. Coaching, obviously, it was one season, so it's hard for me to put him much higher than B+, but I think it was a very strong year, and he definitely got what he could out of this roster. And I have them in fringe contender as well. I think that they're a tier below the true contenders in the NHL, but if things go right, if the bounces go their way like they did at the end of Game 7 against St. Louis, they're a team that can make some noise in the playoffs. But I think that you need quite a bit of things to go right, and first of all, the big one is obviously Connor Hellebuyck looking like the best goalie in the world when it matters. You look at their numbers last year, and obviously, first place in the NHL. They were very good defensively last year, especially in terms of what they in terms of the actual goals against, right? Goals against, they were first. Jay Fresh has them at fourth in expected goals against. Evolving Hockey has them significantly lower than that, but still very solid defensively, especially for a team that I don't think has great individual defense. Their team defense was excellent under Scott O'Neill. I think it was the best overall defensive season we've seen from the Jets post move from Atlanta. And even if you go back to the Thrashers days, I really don't think they had a team that was this strong defensively. And it was very systematic. It very much wasn't the individual players, because there's no, even looking at the team now, there's really, there's nobody I can point to and be like, that's a Selke level defender that they have, or that's somebody who'd be in for best defensive defenseman in the league. They really don't have that. It was very, very structured and very systematic, which I think is something that this team really needed, because it's something that they've lacked under some of their other coaches. I mean, like the Paul Maurice teams never had great defense, and a lot of it seemed to be, for as good of a coach as I think Paul Maurice is, he wasn't able to, structure something together that would work for his players specifically. Like, it's very much, he needed the right guys for his system, and obviously, like, Florida has been an incredible example of that. And then, you go to the Rick Bowness era, which I think they got a bit better, but it wasn't this, right? Like, this was easily their best defensive season. Do I think that could regress a little bit? Yes and no, because, I mean, at the same time, like, if the actual team defense gets worse, you still have Connor Hellebuyck, who has proven now for multiple seasons that he can weather the storm and put up exceptional numbers, especially in the regular season. So I'm not really worried about that. The offense, on the other hand, I am a little concerned about because, like, obviously 13th in goals for, 11th in expected goals for last year. Evolving Hockey probably has them about the same. But you lose Nikolai Ehlers. You don't get yourself a second-line center. I don't know where the offense behind Connor and Scheifele is going to come from. And, even if they repeat what they did last year, they still ended up 13th in the NHL in goals for, right? Like, that's not exceptional, right? That's not fantastic. First in power play, I think that their power play numbers are primed to drop off in terms of like what their expected numbers were last year compared to their finishing. It's not a team that historically has massively outshot their expected numbers on the power play, so I could see that definitely falling down. And then their special teams, their penalty kill has been pretty mediocre overall. So there's things to like on this team, and I think that like the defensive side of this team is going to be good next year, just based on the fact that they have Connor Hellebuyck, but also because the structure and the system that was in place last season worked exceptionally well and really was able to get a lot of players to play better than their individual numbers suggest. But it really is the offense, which is so strange because when talking about the Jets forever, it's always been a team that's been really fun and very, fast-paced offensive. And I don't know if that's necessarily what we're going to get from them moving forward in this next season. So let's jump into the offense here. And like I said, like, there really isn't a ton of like exceptional defenders on this team. I think, Adam Lowry and Alex Alfalo are the two that really jump out on that third line. And it's a third line that I think could be really, really strong defensively. But, obviously like the top end of this team isn't great in that sense. I mean, Kyle Connor is not a very good defender. He's gotten slightly better, but still not, exceptional there. And Mark Scheifele, same thing. Gabe Vilardi is somebody I think is extremely underrated in terms of what he does for this team. Now, I don't know if he has like another gear beyond what he is now. But in terms of being, a really good, fringe first line forward, I think that he fits that bill really well. And they don't really need him to be much better than that because obviously Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele can kind of carry the offensive load there at the top. Nito Niederreiter is somebody that I've really liked, but he's definitely taken a step back over the last year or so. It wasn't a great season for him last season. And I'm intrigued to see if maybe he can kind of step up and be more of like the Nikolai Ehlers for this team now that Ehlers is gone. The big concern that I have is Nemestikov, and we'll get into it, but like he was somebody who really, really benefited from the way that Ehlers played the game, and not having that anymore we could see a decline in what Nemestikov is. Like, I don't think that he's a second line center on a good day, but obviously he was playing that role quite a bit last season. We'll see if there's a bit of a drop off there. Cole Perfetti is a big question mark for me because if he can, jump in and be the top six forward that he was billed to be out of the draft, then that would be, exactly what this team needs. If he can't, then it's going to be time to start looking either elsewhere or giving one of those other guys a shot, right? Giving, some of the young players that are playing on the Moose an opportunity to kind of take that spot, like even like a Brad Lambert is somebody that's kind of waiting on the wings for that opportunity. Throughout the rest of the lineup, I mean, I really like Cole Kopke. I think that he is an excellent depth add for this team. And obviously Jonathan Toews is the other big one that they brought in this summer, and we'll talk about Jonathan Toews a little bit more, but I think the expectations around him from what the team has said coming out of camp are a bit outlandish. And I don't know if that's the plan, that Jonathan Taves is going to be the 2C, and that's just the way it's going to be. I think they're going to be very disappointed. But it's a great story, and we'll dive on him in a second. And obviously they bring in Gustav Nyquist, which is okay. There's not a whole lot there that I'm really in love with, but he's a fine depth option for this team overall. We start by talking about Kyle Connor, and Kyle Connor's finishing has really carried him, as an overall player here. He has, excellent, hockey IQ with the puck. He's super, super skilled when he has the puck. Obviously, the defensive numbers are what they are, but he actually had a very strong, or not, I wouldn't say strong, but he had a very decent season last year defensively. But it's really his finishing that carries him here. His goal scoring is one of the best in the league. And he's able to just create the opportunities for himself. He doesn't do it, on a ton of volume, but he's able to capitalize exceptionally well on his opportunities, and that's what makes him, an extremely dangerous player. Obviously, it's a big contract year for him. That's kind of the looming question here over the Winnipeg Jets, because if Kyle Connor decides that he wants to test the market and see what's out there, it's going to be a big question, right? I mean, the NHL just came out with their big thing here that the cap's shooting up to, I think they said $180 million in the next, 6-7 years. And, a team like Winnipeg's just not going to be able to pay $100 million worth of salary. It's just not that's extremely there's very, very slim chance that's actually going to be what happens. It's unlikely. So you're going to see players it's going to be tough to keep players who want to get paid. And I could see Kyle Connor signing a shorter bridge deal, but, going into, an age 28 season, it's tough, right? He's right in the prime of his career, and we'll see kind of what his decision is on where he wants to play. But I mean, man, it's a loaded free agent class, right? We have Kaprizov, who's, a question mark right now. Kyle Connor's a question mark right now. And then obviously the big one in Edmonton, which we'll talk about, in a couple videos, it's all very intriguing. But for me, Kyle Connor is obviously the spark plug that kind of is the bell cow of this offense. He's going to be their primary contributor, and as long as he's here, the Jets are going to have a pretty potent offense, at least at the top of their lineup, because of the creativity that Kyle Connor brings to it. Mark Scheifele's in kind of the same boat. I mean, defensively, there's a lot to be desired here, but again, somebody who's gotten better, over the last couple of years, and I definitely think that his defensive numbers actually took a bit of a jump last year too. So again, I think the Scott O'Neill system really helped both those players out. And Scott O'Neill's been around the team for a bit now, so he understands. He's kind of seen what's worked and what hasn't with those players, and like that he's gotten about what you can hope for defensively out of both Connor and Scheifele. But Mark Scheifele's offensive numbers are again one of the best in the league. He's able to drive play exceptionally well. He's able to create at a very high level, and having him and Connor together as kind of that 1-2 punch up front does give them one of the best duos in terms of offensive creation in the NHL. Again, you'd like the defense to be a bit better, but overall the team defense was really good last year, so if they can just recreate that, and these two can get to another gear together, then the Jets could be looking really, really good. But overall, I've been critical of Scheifele in the past, but he had a strong season last year. He had a string of a couple strong seasons, and if he can just be this, then that's all they really need from him, and they just need to find the 2C. But in terms of being a good number one center, I don't think you can complain much if these are the numbers you're going to get from Mark Scheifele year over year. Gabe Vilardi, like I said, is really a player that I've really liked. Now his defensive numbers plummeted when he came to the Jets in 23-24, but offensively they were able to get a bit more out of him last season in terms of his creativity and ability to generate chances, and his finishing. Again, like we're talking about another guy here similar to Connor, has been driven by his finishing ability, and he's only 25 years old, 25, 26 years old, just signed a new extension. He's locked up now, and I think if you can keep getting some of that offensive play driving out of him, and make him less reliant just on his finishing ability and be able to kind of generate more opportunities, Gabe Vilardi could be somebody that does develop more as we keep going here, but it's going to be about consistency. He's had issues with a bit of fluctuation in terms of his offensive and defensive numbers over the last couple of years, and that kind of comes with being young. And I'm intrigued to see if they can kind of develop it into a bona fide, top line winger, because, in the event that Kyle Connor does leave this year, I think Gabe Vilardi can actually slot into that role pretty well, being kind of the primary goal scorer in quotations on this team. If they can surround them with, some other players. So I do think this is a big year for Gabe Vilardi, as well as it is for, obviously guys like Kyle Connor, who's playing for a contract. But I think it's important for Vilardi because if he can kind of take the reins and become that primary guy, then, if a Connor contract extension doesn't end up happening, you're sitting in a better position here if you're the Jets, where you can you have a bit more leverage. Having a guy like Gabe Vilardi who developed into a top line guy, and I think that it's there. I don't know if I'd bank on him turning into a superstar first liner, but I do think that there's potential that he can be an everyday first line guy and put up point a game type numbers in the right situation. And obviously being young, there's still some growth there. He's just heading into his prime now, so there is room for him to establish himself in that role, and he started doing it last year. I'm not saying that he hasn't touched that level at all. I think he had a very strong season last season. So it's just about him finding that consistency, being that player every single night in and night out, and then improving the defense too, getting it kind of back to where it was before he left LA. And I think you're looking at a very strong player. Cole Perfetti, like I said in the intro, is such a wild card to me, right? If Cole Perfetti's micro stats have not been good, right? He's left a lot of inconsistency and a lot to be desired for his game. But he's shown flashes of being that, top six forward that the Jets drafted him to be. And it's really going to be about trying to get consistency out of him too, right? And he's somebody that has been thrown around the lineup a little bit and hasn't really had a set role, on this team. And I think that's definitely been a part of why we've seen what we have out of Perfetti. But especially with the departure of Nikolai Ehlers, which I think is been being massively understated by a lot of Jets fans who, and rightfully so. We're talking about a guy who's playing essentially third line minutes in Winnipeg. But what Ehlers was able to do to kind of help stabilize the lineup is now gone, and we're going to see the ripple effects of that as the season go along. And I really don't think the Jets, at least externally, were able to replace that, right? I mean, Cole Koepke and Gustav Nyquist are not going to replace the production of what Nikolai Ehlers was in terms of a play driver, in terms of a dynamic playmaker, his transition game, all those things that he was so good at. They aren't going to be those guys aren't going to be the ones replacing it, right? So you need to find it internally, and I think that Cole Perfetti is in a very unique position now to maybe not come up with the same skill set as what Ehlers was, but at least take those minutes and take that role away from him. And just be, a bona fide top six forward for this team. And we haven't seen it yet, but there's been flashes, right? We've seen Ehlers have moments where he's looked really, really strong. So we've seen Perfetti have moments where he looks really, really strong. It's just about consistency, right? And I think that's the kind of the big story with a lot of the younger players on this team is just that consistent play. And this is going to be kind of a make it or break it season for me for Cole Perfetti. I think if he's not able to fully grasp that second line role full time and be that guy, and hell, maybe he transitions to be the 2C on this team. I think there's still some life to that, despite the fact the Jets seem to like playing him on the wing. If he's not able to at least grasp that second line, winger spot, there's going to be questions about what his ceiling is as a player, because now we're getting into him transitioning from the development side to kind of his prime and being what he is, and he's getting to that age where that's starting to be the transition. So I think if he's not able to establish some kind of growth and development in his game at this point, then he could kind of stagnate out as a middle six, a good solid middle six player, But I need to see that next level if the Jets are truly going to be serious here, and I think he can do it. But it's just going to be a matter of proving that, and I'd bet on him, and the Jets are certainly betting on him. I think that they probably tried to bring somebody in this summer, but weren't able to do it, at least in free agency. So for me, Cole Perfetti is very much the X factor on this team, and is going to kind of determine, or going to be a key reason to determine how high this team can go. You look at Nino Niederreiter, and Nino Niederreiter is a interesting guy. When the Jets brought him in, I was very high on him. I thought it was a phenomenal trade. The contract was good. Everything about him was great. He was very much analytical darling. He was great on both ends of the ice. And it seems like every year that he's been in Winnipeg now, his numbers have started to deteriorate. And he is 33, going on 34. So the decline is supposed to happen. But again, if he continues to decline and continues to not be that, a super effective, dynamic, two-way guy, then the Jets have a couple holes in the top 6 now, right? Because you'd lose Ehlers, Cole Perfetti's got some inconsistencies, and Nino Niederreiter can't be that great play driving winger on the second line. You really start to look at what the Jets can do offensively, and this is where the concerns come in, because they were 13th in the league last year in goals for, and there's nothing really that I can cling to and be like, yeah, that number is going to go up this year, right? Because they lose Ehlers' production, they're seeing declining returns on what Nino Niederreiter is. You have questions about the second line center spot. You have questions about Cole Perfetti. I think that Gustav Nyquist is an interesting player. He had a horrid year last year. So there's really concerns here, and I think that for Niederreiter, if he can maintain the level of play that he had last year, I think that's good enough. I think that you have to kind of just be okay with that at this point. His power play numbers are solid, so if you can get a decent 5-on-5 play out of him, then they should be fine. But it's just there is concerns about what he's going to look like by the end of the season, because he is getting older, right? And when you're playing kind of that high-paced, style of play, it's hard to maintain that for, into your 30s. We've seen a lot of players like that, eventually kind of deteriorate. And we saw that last year. Now the question is, was it a system thing? Was it just a fit? Was it the fact that he was kind of bouncing around the lineup too? It's hard to say, but again, consistency out of Nino Niederreiter is important, because we've seen him be a phenomenal just possession, transition type player, and he's somebody that needs to get back to that level, because last year just wasn't it. And again, if this team's going to be serious and going to be a championship contender, I do think that there's questions about what the offense looks like, and especially beyond the Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele's of the world, who have really helped cover up a lot of the the blemishes on what this team can do offensively. Again, I think defensively, the Jets forward core was able to add some guys who are interesting, but in terms of offense and secondary scoring, you definitely need to see a resurgence from a couple of these guys, and Niederreiter is one of them. Vlad Namestnikov, and it's going to feel like I'm ripping on it, but to me, the biggest concern I have about Vlad Namestnikov is the loss of Nikolai Ehlers, which is really, I can't hammer home how important I think that's actually going to be to this team. But we saw his offensive production raise a little bit last season. His defensive numbers declined a little bit. But this is a guy, when we talk about Vlad Namestnikov, right? He was playing second line minutes a lot of the time last season. Especially him and Lowry were kind of splitting that role. But this is somebody who was a fourth liner most of his career, right? It's just now that he's been kind of thrust into that second line role, and he's survived, right? But I think that how good Vlad Namestnikov is a little overstated among Jets fans, just because of the fact that he's been able to jump into those higher elevated roles and not completely sink. But in terms of his production, his finishing isn't very good. His offensive play driving isn't very good. His defensive numbers are fine, but there's really not I don't think we've seen a lot out of him And one of my big concerns is that like a lot of the play driving, a lot of the possession stuff that line was so good at last year was because of Nikolai Ehlers. Like the numbers back that up. That like, you know, if we look at the four Jets lines last season, right? You had the Perfetti, Ehlers, Nemestikov line is the line I really want to touch on here. And, you know, we just looked at Perfetti's numbers a second ago. We just looked at Nemestikov's numbers a second ago. Neither of them were particularly good in terms of like play driving and generating offense and creating chances. And yet that line for the Jets was, you know, second in goals for percentage at 64.11%. They were, you know, they were first on the team in expected goals for in 54.84%. They were second in Corsi for behind the fourth line for the Jets. They really like their shots for percentage was second on the team. Like they were generating a ton of offense, but as we just saw, it wasn't Perfetti leading that drive. It wasn't Nemestikov leading that drive. So it only leaves one other option here, right? Like it only leaves one other name, and that name is Nikolai Ehlers. And I don't know where that drive is going to come from, right? Like you need Cole Perfetti to step up and be that guy, right? You need Nino Niederreiter to step onto that line potentially and be that guy. And that's a big question mark for me because if their second best production line, in some cases their best production line in terms of offense, or in terms of like total play, right? This is percentages, right? So like obviously the offensive line was the Velarde, Connor, and Scheifele line, but their defense was so horrid that like their splits actually aren't great. But in terms of like their full production line on both ends of the ice, the best you're getting was from Nikolai Ehlers. Like he was the most overall productive player for what the team needed on both ends of the ice, and you lost that. So I have legitimate concerns about that second line here for the Jets, and I think that it's very much been understated around, you know, circles with the team. And I think that's why I want to bring it up here, because I do think it's going to be a significant issue, and maybe they have a solution for it. Maybe Gustav Nyquist comes in and is, you know, bounces back and gets, you know, out of the horrid season that he had last year. Maybe Niederreiter can step up and take that Ehlers spot. Maybe Cole Perfetti breaks out. Maybe that Brad Lambert comes in and plays on that line and looks phenomenal. Like there's solutions, but right now it's a problem, and I don't love the solutions that they have to fix it, right? Like I don't think any of those solutions are guaranteed locks to work. And that's where my concern comes in, right? Like, can it be fixed? Yeah. Can it be fixed internally? Maybe. But I don't love any of the solutions that they have currently on the roster. Like I think that there's legitimate questions about it, and that's kind of where my whole point on this second line comes from. You know, Alex Alafalo is a super intriguing player because his defensive numbers are actually fairly solid. You know, his in terms of retrievals and exits, they're not, you know, fantastic. His successful exit percentage is very high once he gets the puck, but his you know, retrievals per 60 isn't anything, you know, flashy. But what makes Alex Alafalo extremely intriguing to me is one, his forechecking prowess, right? He's an insane forechecker. This is very much a Carolina Hurricanes player, in terms of like somebody that would fit that middle six there. But I think that's very important for the Jets here too, because when he's, you know, playing with guys like Lowry, and even Gustav Nyquist to a lesser extent, I do think that forechecking prowess is going to be very important to winning those battles and getting the puck out to guys who, you know, can be scorers, like, you know, Gustav Nyquist has proven he can be in the past. The thing that I really like about Iafalo's game is his underrated defensive play, right? I think that he's very sneakily good at stopping rushes. He's very good at, you know, getting into lanes, not allowing, you know, grade A scoring chances against. And those are things that are harder to measure, let's say, but he does a very good job of that. Like his defensive zone, you know, hockey sense is actually very high. And I do think that that's going to be a key contributor to what the bottom six on this team looks like, because I do actually like the bottom six. I think it's the middle six that I have issue with, particularly the second line. But I do like what this team has at the bottom of its lineup, and I think having a guy like Iafalo, and then you pair him with guys like, you know, Koki and Lowry, I do think that you're going to have a really, really strong kind of hard to play against bottom six, and IXL follow, I think, is an underrated part of that. It was an underrated part of the trade when Dubois was sent out. And I think that he's starting to kind of get a bit more love for that. Obviously, last year was weird because he kind of got thrown up and down the lineup with the injury to Flaherty and everything. But I think, getting him kind of a stable spot on that third line is going to be important. And, we'll see his numbers kind of improve as the situation gets more stable for him. The resurgence of Adam Lowry has been phenomenal, right? Like, we talk about some of these guys here, and this is a player who has just been incredible at both generating offense and in terms of it, defending it. He's been an elite defender for a couple of years now, and just fantastic in that sense. But his even strength offense has actually gotten a lot better. Now, he declined a little bit there. He also went on a crazy shooting bender last year. Now, because his play creation and driving has actually been very stable as a top player, the question is what his shooting percentage actually maintaining what it did last season, and his finishing staying kind of at a stable level are less massive to me, because I think that, like, because of just how many chances he's creating, the goals were going to come. But because his shooting percentages really haven't been what they were up until last year, despite that, it's a weird situation, because it's hard to say whether the PDO is going to go up or down. In that sense, typically the numbers are going to say that the chance creation and the shooting percentage will eventually even out and be equal. But it's an interesting situation, regardless of the fact, though. Like, if Adam Lowry needs to be like an elite scorer for you, there's an issue there. But I mean, man, he has really, really impressed me the last couple of years. Really stepping up into that pseudo second line center spot, and obviously splitting reps with Nemestikov and everything else that they've had there. But they've really kind of weathered the storm with him there, and he's been very, very good. And I think that, like, the best thing for him would just be getting a true second line center, and then you could have Lowry be your 3C, play against weaker competition, and just kind of excel in that spot. And, can he be the second line center for this team? And do I think that it would be fine? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he proved that last season. But I really think that, like, not having that spot, secured right now, is almost like diminishing what Adam Lowry can be for you, because, when he's been in especially in those third line roles, he's looked significant, like, he's looked incredible. And I think that having a gem here, especially for $3.3 million here for another season, and I suspect that getting him re-signed isn't going to be an issue. You really have to be happy with the production you've gotten out of him, and it sounds like he's somebody that wants to be here for a while, for the rest of his career, and obviously being the captain of the team, you'd hope that's the case. But Adam Lowry's been fantastic, and I think the Jets fans should be very, very happy with the production they've gotten out of him, especially for the money. I mean, the surplus value on him has been phenomenal, even if the scoring does end up dropping down a little bit this season. I really don't think it's going to be much of an issue. Kuzov Nyquist they brought in, and like I said, just a really, really poor season for him overall last season. Defensively he was pretty league average, but his scoring was just in the tank. His play driving was really bad too, and I do wonder if it was just like a Minnesota thing. He was asked to do a lot when he was brought into Minnesota, and it was like it wasn't good in Nashville either. It was just, I mean, everything in Nashville was a mess last season. So I think getting him a fresh start, getting him more of a stable role would be good. The question I have though is, like, is that going to happen? Right? Like, is this the guy that they're going to kind of turn to as soon as, Cole Perfetti starts off slow and be like, okay, Nyquist, you're now on our second line, having to be, primary contributor. I don't know if that's viable for this team. And that's really where my overall concern is here for the Jets. So I do worry in that sense. Can he be fine as like on a third line, playing a bit of power play time, being, decent on the penalty kill? Yeah, like, that's fine. But if they want him to, elevate at any level above that, it's going to be pretty hard for me to buy into that. And that's kind of the case with somebody else that we're going to talk about in a second. in terms of like me buying that they can kind of elevate beyond that. Because at this point, I mean, we're talking about somebody here who's 36. It was end of the year at 36. I just like it's a lot for me to be like, yeah, Gustav Nyquist is going to be the second line winger on this team, and they're going to be really good, and they're going to try to win a Stanley Cup. I don't really buy that. Even on a third line, like I think there's significantly better players they could have went after for the price they paid, who would have fit that role better. But there's upside, but I think the upside's kind of minimal, especially for the age and the type of player that he is. I don't know if you're going to get much more than somebody who's good on the special teams, but doesn't contribute much 5-on-5. Cole Koepke, I loved last season. Now he's 26. It was his first year in the NHL, but I think especially in a really really volatile Boston team, especially like post deadline. He put up some really, really strong defensive numbers. I mean, he was fantastic. Now, he did against weak competition, so there's that. But as a fourth liner, I think that the bet here is actually very safe. Like, there's a lot of, like, the moderate upside is here. He was a very good passer. It's just, like, the competition level does concern me a little bit. Like, he was a little bit sheltered last season. But in terms of, like, the acquisition cost here for the Jets being, like, nothing, you might have yourself a pretty solid fourth liner here. And this is kind of what I'm talking about in the NHL, where like you can take low risk swings on like your fourth liners like this, and get some really good surplus value, right? Because if he's like a middle of the pack NHLer, like if he basically does what he did last year with Boston, this is a slam dunk of a margin bet here, by Kevin Cheveldayoff. So I really like this pickup. I think his numbers last year were really strong despite the low competition. In terms of like a low event defensive fourth liner who can contribute a little bit offensively. He's a decent passer. He's a decent at the breakouts and everything. Those things are there is value there. So I'd be looking for him to be kind of a secret, like a Winnipeg Jets fan secret. We're talking in like January, February, and people are talking about Cole Koepke being a really underrated player. I think Jets fans could really like him by the January February mark. He'll be talked about kind of as an underrated player on this team. I definitely think that could be the discussion that's had at that point in the season. And finally, we get to Jonathan Toews, man. Jonathan Toews is a unique discussion here because he was 34 in 22-23. Obviously, now we're in 25-26. Jonathan Toews hasn't played hockey for 2 years. Very similar to the Gabriel Landeskog conversation we had, except for the difference was that Gabriel Landeskog was younger, and Gabriel Landeskog was significantly better pre him having to take time off. The Jonathan Toews story is fun. Right? Like it's really fun. It's like the perfect send off for a guy who, obviously was going to be, if he's going to come back, it was extremely likely to be the Jets. If the expectation is that a Jonathan Toews who was in the bottom 7% of the NHL in terms of his goals over replacement rating the last time he played hockey, who is going to be 3 years older, is going to step in and be the second line center on this team. And I mean, hell, if his bonuses hit, they're paying him like a second line center. And now keep in mind, his only bonuses are tied to games played, right? They're not points based. They're games played bonuses, meaning that if he plays the season as the second line center, just regardless of how good he is at it, he gets paid like $7 million. I think it's less than that. I think it's 7 if they win the cup, but it might be 5 or 6 or something. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the structure of the contract was. Regardless of the fact that like there's significant bonuses in him just playing games, right? We've already established the fact that Jets do not have a bona fide second line center at this point. Plus, like everything the Jets have been saying has been focused on Jonathan Toews being the second line center. The odds of Jonathan Toews coming back from what was very likely, when it happened, a career-ending, injury or stoppage of play, let's put it that way. Coming back, being 37 years old, and revitalizing his career to the point that he's a strong second-line center on a team trying to win a Stanley Cup. I don't buy it. All right, if Jonathan Toews is your fourth-line center, and you find yourself an actual 2C, sure, why not? It's fun. It's sure. But when Jonathan Toews left, he was a top 6 center on a awful team and was awful, right? If the Jets really want to be taken seriously here as a true cup contender, a championship level team, if this is your 2C going into the season, and everything they've told us has said Jonathan Toews is the second line center. He wasn't brought in to be a fourth liner. Okay, let's see. I'll call your bluff. Let's roll the dice and let's see what happens. And let's see who's right at the end of the year. And hey, if Jonathan Toews comes out and is phenomenal and it's the second line center on this team and they win the Stanley Cup, good for you. It's not a bet I would have made. I'm not saying I wouldn't have signed Jonathan Toews. I think signing Jonathan Toews is fun, but I certainly wouldn't be parading him around as my top 6 center behind Mark Scheifele and trying to be taken seriously as a cup contender, right? I understand that, players don't want to come here. Brock Nelson didn't want to come here. So this is the best you got. You got a player who wants to be here. But I just don't buy it. I don't buy him being a legitimate second line center. I'm sorry. I didn't buy it when he was playing it in Chicago before he left. I don't buy it now. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I really don't see that. If that's the plan and that's what they're banking on, I don't buy it. And I think they're going to be disappointed. I think it's a fun story. I think Jonathan Toews being in Winnipeg, ending his career here is cool. I think that's the super cool moment. And having him come out on for opening night and get his name announced, he's going to have the loudest ovation in the stadium. He's going to sell the most jerseys this year. All right, so from a business perspective, I fully understand it. But if you're a Jets fan and you're looking at this and you're seeing all the marketing and the messaging about Jonathan Toews being the 2C and saving the team, it has to seem like pandering, right? I don't know how you can see that at face value, right? He's going to be their number one jersey seller. That's why they're doing it. I don't know. I feel like the messaging from the Jets is very pandering to the fan base and to the emotions of the team. And I think that, when we're sitting in the dog days of the NHL season and Jonathan Toews looks like a, 37-year-old center who hasn't played in 2 years, it's going to be kind of a tough look for a team that was this open about him not being that player. But maybe he comes back and he looks great. Maybe he comes back and he's 2013 Jonathan Toews and everything's fine. But I have my doubts. We look at this blue line, and this blue line is really a tale of 2 groups. I think the top 4 on this team is pretty strong. And I think the bottom of the lineup leaves something to be desired. I mean, the Josh Morrissey resurgence has been, it needs to be studied because when he signed his contract, it looked like it was going to be one of the worst contracts in the NHL. And then Paul Maurice left, and then Josh Morrissey became a Norris contender. Dylan DeMello has consistently been one of the more underrated defensemen in the league. I think that he's starting to kind of take steps back now, but he's still a really strong middle of the lineup defender. Dylan Sandberg is really the fan favorite player for me here. He is incredibly underrated in terms of what he can do. I mean, hell, he made Neil Pionk look exceptional last season. And Neil Pionk's here, who did have a bounce back season last year, but I'm not buying it, for him being more than just, the fourth defender on this team. But he did have a really strong season last year. And obviously it led to a U.S. development camp invite. So good for him. The bottom of this lineup is where I think that there's definitely opportunity for one of the young players to step in, because I don't think that Hayden Fleury is an everyday defender here, and I certainly don't love Luke Shen for what he can be. He's fine, but I think that if he's your fifth defender, that's kind of an issue. If he's your sixth or seventh defender, it looks a bit better. But I think that there's the Hayden Fleury slot is where I definitely see an opportunity for somebody to step up from this kind of prospect pool and from the Moose to kind of take that spot. But overall, like, I do think it's a really strong blue line, obviously led by Josh Morrissey, who I think is like just outside of the Norris conversation the last couple of years. And let's start with that, because I mean, like, man, the resurgence of Josh Morrissey as a defender too, like as becoming a two-way defender, has been phenomenal. Like he took the prime of his career and just was like, I'm just going to add another versatile like piece to my arsenal, and he's very steadily became a top defender, year over year now. Now I think I still need to see it like consistency now, like as a top defender, before I'm like willing to fully buy into it. But he's been very good in that role. Obviously as the number one guy here, he's been in my Norris conversation the last couple of years. Elite finisher, elite, assist person, elite play driver. He's really everything you want in an offensive defenseman. I think he's just below that top tier of, offensive defenseman. He's just outside of that, the Cale Makar tier in the world. But I definitely think that there's a discussion for him being, right there. And another very strong offensive season might get him there. And it's just it's been the post Paul Maurice Josh Morrissey is a completely different player than when he was under Paul Maurice. And I don't know what it was and what kind of unlocked this from Josh Morrissey, but like he's been incredible as an offensive creator, and his defensive metrics have taken a huge jump over the last 3 seasons, and pairing those things together, like he truly does look like a top pair defenseman now. Now his power play numbers aren't very good, and that's just kind of par for the course with some offensive defensemen for some reason, as you've been following in this series. But overall, I mean, like, there's really not much to hate about Josh Morrissey. I've been a proud, I've been banging my fist against the wall, trying to get Josh Morrissey some Norris votes. I've been very vocal on him being in that top group the last couple of years, and I don't think much of that's going to change here going to 25, 26. I think as a number one defender, he's right up there. I think that, aside from the couple of years of Dustin Byfuglien, where he was, one of the best defenders in the league, like kind of like right around when they traded Andrew Ladd, this is the best defender that the Jets have had by a pretty wide margin. So he's been really, really good. Dylan Sandberg again, like, is just like is so underrated. Especially defensively. I mean, his ability to his retrievals and exits are phenomenal already as a young defender. His ability to stop zone entries is actually like above league average as well. Just his positioning in the defensive zone is really good. I would like to see him like take another step offensively, but he doesn't, like, it's not necessary, because he's like good enough offensively where it's like not like a detriment to his game. He's not a defensive defenseman. He's definitely a two-way guy. But Dylan Sandberg is one of my favorite players on this team, just in terms of what he can bring to the team. I think that just as that secondary guy behind Josh Morrissey, not having to face the number one competition night over night, gives him such a unique advantage, because it's allowed him to kind of develop and become this like next weapon behind. And I mean, as Dylan DeMello starts to decline a little bit, I think that this is really gonna be the first year where Dylan Sandberg is like the true number 2 guy on this team. And he's more than ready for it. Like, I don't see a decline in his numbers happening. I could really see this being a massive breakout year in terms of being like a national talking point for Dylan Sandberg. And it's really a shame that he didn't get an invite to the U.S. Olympic camp, because I think that, although I don't think he would have made the team, I think that getting him that experience would have been really good for him, and he was certainly deserving. He would have been on my list, especially over Brady Shea and Neil Pionk. So it was a little disappointed to not see him there, but he's somebody that I think is going to get a ton of attention this season, because I think he does really take that step to be the true number 2 guy on this team, and that's going to be good for the Jets overall, because as DeMelo starts to kind of decline and come out of his prime, having Dylan Sandberg step up and take over and be a better defender, honestly, and be a better overall player than what DeMelo was in his prime. I think it's going to be really, really good. And we've talked a lot about a lot of these teams, having that true number 1 and number 2. And, this team has Josh Morrissey. And I think this is the year that Dylan Sandberg really, really, separates himself as, a real good number 2 in the NHL. Speaking of Dylan DeMelo, like I said, 31 years old, still signed for another 3 years, $4.9 million. I think it's a good contract. His offensive numbers, I saw a bit of a rise last season, but he's never been, a great offensive defenseman. He's very much been a solid defender. He's been a strong defender most of his career, a decent penalty kill guy, playing at, high competition. But I think, the thing that's underrated about DeMelo, and the thing that I've liked about him, is that his offensive creation really isn't there, but his ability in transition is there. And that's what I've always liked about him, and it's still, that's still part of his game, and I think that's where his strength is here for the Jets, is just being a good defender who understands that he's not going to be the one creating. He's not, a Josh Morrissey, for example. But he's able to, and I think this is why that's such a good pairing, because you have, DeMelo, who's the defensive, more responsible guy, and then you have Josh Morrissey, who can be the offensive creator. And DeMelo's ability to kind of get the puck out of the zone and into offensive situations is so underrated. His transition ability is fantastic. Maybe not as a puck carrier, but just as a distributor. Getting out of the neutral zone and into the offensive zone is so unique. And even as he's aged, that ability is still there, and it was there last year, even though he has declined a little bit overall. That ability to work in transition is still there, and he's still very, very good at that. And that's certainly his strength, and it's certainly going to be something that, even as his role now decreases, as somebody like Dylan Sandberg, who's also very good, at the zone exits and in transition, kind of takes over as that number 2 guy. I think it could actually help DeMelo and kind of really create this 1-2-3 punch in this blue line, where they have 3 guys who can all do that at a very effective level. And despite DeMelo's lack of creativity with the puck, his ability to distribute is still very strong. And I think that's an underrated part of his game, attached to the defensive numbers, because he's able to stop those opportunities and then get the puck out and have his team start creating offense. Finally, you have Neil Pionk, who, like I said, had a stronger season last year, but I still think that there's we've seen a lot of decline from Pionk over the last number of years, and I certainly think that there's concerns about what the future looks like for him, as he's now getting into his 30s, getting kind of out of his prime. I really think that there's a world now where he looks a little bit worse, year over year now. But again, being the 4th or 5th defender on this team, depending if one of the young guys steps up and improves, is really going to help lighten his load as a defender, right? I think that there's still been sparks in Pionk's game that he's been able to take advantage of. Again, I think last year was a pretty solid season for him. But, the Rick Bonus years were not great to him. So I'm curious to see if we can get a Neil Pionk that is playing a lesser role now, that can kind of have a bit of a resurgence and continue to have seasons like he did last year. I think he was actually pretty decent, especially for what you expected from him. And I think that would be overall helpful to what the Jets are. Finally, we jump into the goaltending. I mean, there's not much to say about Connor Hellebuyck, right? The question mark here is Eric Comrie, who I think is an underrated backup. I think that he's pretty solid. I don't think he's in the top tier of backup goaltenders, but he's solid enough for what he is. But it's can Connor Hellebuyck do it in the playoffs, right? You look at his numbers, and he's been the best goalie in the NHL the last couple of years. There's really not much to say about it. But I definitely think that his game's play percentage being 77% is insane, right? he is getting so many, like he's playing so many games, and I really think that the biggest detriment to Connor Hellebuyck's playoff stuff has just been the games played in the regular season. He's overplayed, and I really think that that's the biggest issue. And it's just getting those games played down, right? It's not trying to win the President's Trophy, because you don't have to do that, right? Get into the playoffs, right? Like the Florida Panthers have perfected this. Get into the playoffs and then just let your best players actually be your best players. And I think that, getting Connor Hellebuyck closer to 50 games played rather than 70 would be like the biggest thing to help his playoff numbers. I truly, truly believe that. I think that the pressure, like mentally, is there for him, but I think just getting him more rested, more physically prepared for those games is going to help too. Like the mental side, there's not much you can analyze about that, right? Like I'm not a sports psychologist. I can't begin to tell you about how the brain of a goaltender works. But I think from at least like a numbers perspective and an on ice physical perspective, 77% games played percentage is far too high for them, and it's been, I think, at least part of what has led him to where he is. I think physically being fatigued. I don't think he's like fatigued. I don't think that he's like, he just can't handle it. But I think the mental fatigue is there, but also compounding that with the physical fatigue of him playing like 80% of his team's games every year doesn't help. So I think that, you can start to help him by getting him closer to, 55, even 60 games a season rather than closer to 70. And I think that would be a positive for what Connor Hellebuyck needs. I don't think it's the answer, because I do think that a lot of it is mental, but I certainly think that it's definitely a contributing factor to what his plays looked like. But I mean, like regular season wise, Connor Hellebuyck's like clearly the best goalie in the league. There isn't much of a discussion to be had there. Like nobody's had the consistency that he has among the other goalies that I've had ranked kind of in the top 5 group. Nobody's had the consistency he has year over year. So like every other goalie that we've talked about, I mean, Ilya Sorokin is my number 2 goalie here, and I mean Shesterkin, same thing. Both those goalies have had a down season in the last 3 years. Connor Hellebuyck hasn't. He has been the best goalie in the league 3 years in a row, at least. So I'm not really concerned about that. It's going to be the playoffs, right? That's what it comes down to here for the discussion around him is what's he going to look like in the playoffs. And it's unfair to some extent, but at the same time, like North American sports, the playoffs are all that matters, right? This isn't European. That's another discussion for another day. We can have the does the regular season matter discussion at another point, but in terms of what the narrative is, in terms of what Connor Hellebuyck's going to tell you himself, it's all about the playoffs, and he just hasn't been up to this level in those games. So it's going to be fascinating to see if he can get back there, and if he can prove that he is the best goalie in the world when it matters, because everything else points to him being that being the case. Found the special teams for this team, like I said, like I have some relative concerns about it. I think that the second power play unit isn't great, but again, I think this is a team that's better than the sum of their parts on special teams. Like I think that when we saw the numbers last year, I think that their shooting percentage on the power play is unsustainable. But I do think that Scott O'Neill has been able to get more out of this, and the coaching staff in general has been able to get more out of these special teams units than what their numbers look like. The first line penalty kill, I think, could be better than it was last season. And in terms of the special teams, like I do think that my rating is hurting them slightly just because of the fact that like my grades are based on what the individual players' grades are. But I think like as a whole, like the team should perform better than 15th in terms of special teams. But we'll kind of see how that plays out. All right, so joining me now is a contributor for Winnipeg Sports Talk and the host of the Chell Chit Chat podcast, Alyssa Hood. Thank you so much for joining us here to talk about the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, happy to be here. Always happy to talk about the Winnipeg Jets.
It's a great time of the season too, with like rookie camp starting up basically right away, and then the preseason, and we're all of a sudden right back into the regular season. So it's a extremely busy time, but yeah, thank you for taking a couple minutes to chat, and let's just jump right into it. So obviously Winnipeg coming off the President's Trophy win and the second round appearance last season. What do you think some reasonable expectations are for the Jets going into 2025-26?
Yeah, I think the first word I would probably use is a little bit of regression, right? President's Trophy is a thing that only one out of 32 teams is actually going to claim every single year. So, in order to achieve that same performance once again, it would be pretty difficult. And I think it would require a lot of other teams probably underperforming a little bit and the Winnipeg Jets once again overperforming. Because while I did think they were a good team last year, President's Trophy is quite the accomplishment. That being said, I do think that just looking at the Central Division, looking at the pieces that moved in and out of the team, I'm still expecting them to be good, and that's kind of the word that I've been using when people ask me about my thoughts on the team. They're good. I think they'll be pretty good.
Yeah, fair enough. So kind of building on that, like if the Jets were to repeat, maybe not as President's Trophy winners, but as like a top 3 to 5 team in the NHL, what do you think would need to happen in order for that to come to fruition?
Yeah, I think a lot of the best teams in the league, their top players, whether it's goalies, defensemen, forwards, they hit. So Connor Hellebuyck would need to have another good season. Josh Morrissey would need to have another good season. And, you can look at some of their big forward pieces that have been pretty good for the last couple of years, like Mark Scheifele and Cal Connor. They, need to continue on the progress that they've made. But their additions are the big ones that I'm circling that need to hit. Gustav Nyquist needs to be better than he was last year. Jonathan Taves needs to come in and put up a similar point per game or point pace that he was putting up in the last couple of years of his career and not fall off a massive cliff, which is a big question mark for a lot of Winnipeg Jets fans. And so their additions in that forward group in particular need to hit, in my opinion. I have pretty confident belief in what I believe that the defense group, is able to do. I'm not too concerned about the depth pieces for the forward group or the defensemen, but we know the Winnipeg Jets defenders this year, which is a bit more of a predictable variable than it was going into last season. But the forward group, and especially the new additions and players coming into new roles, guys like Cole Perfetti, who are going to have new line mates and stuff like that, those guys need to hit in order for the team to perform at a similar caliber to what they did last year.
Yeah. So kind of speaking on players that might need to step up, is there any like prospects or developmental players that really haven't gotten a full shot at the NHL yet that you think could take advantage of a potential opportunity like during the preseason that could come in and be a full-time NHLer this year?
The hope is always yes, right? You would love to see any young gun come in and kind of force their way onto the team, right? Make it so that the team can't possibly send them back to wherever they came from, whether it be the junior hockey league, college, the NHL, or the AHL, pardon me. I think a couple names that we could circle are guys like Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, Braden Yeager, Elias Salomonsson. Those would be kind of the main ones that I think could fight for a spot on the team. Knowing how this team tends to operate and knowing kind of what the pieces are that are a little bit more locked in this group, I don't anticipate right out the gate that any of those guys are going to be NHL regulars. If any one of those players I just mentioned played north of 60 games this year, I would be absolutely shocked. I think that those are guys that are going to definitely contend for spots. Some of them were late cuts at camp last year and everything like that. I think there's more potential to play their way onto the forward group in particular this year than there was last year. Going into last season, the Winnipeg Jets pretty much played the exact same forward group, other than a little bit of a rotating cast on that fourth line. There's a little bit more of a question mark around the forward group, and especially those middle of the lineup roles that guys like Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, and Braden Yeager could slide into. Elias Salomonsson took a massive step in his development last year, but I don't think that there's the right avenue for him to make the decor this year. But I think the team is open to those players all having good camps and allowing them to fight for the right to stay on the team there. I don't anticipate any of them are going to be massive regulars for the team this year, but I'm hoping that they put up a bit of a fight.
Yeah. So kind of touching on just the roster in general, is there an area for this team that you're concerned about going into the season?
I'm definitely circling the top to middle end of the forward group. I am the first person to say that, the stars are where hockey really, really matters. At the end of the day, your 13th, 12th, 11th forward shouldn't really be making or breaking your Stanley Cup winning lineup. But the Winnipeg Jets really have some question marks on that second line, the same way they've had question marks there for the last few years, but even more so with the absence of Nikolai Ehlers. It's something that the team just has no idea how to manage, and not in a bad way. This is just simply a player that's been here for the last 10 years, right? So it's a hole that has never had to be filled in, a relatively long time between him and Kyle Connor kind of always playing on different lines, you always had that sort of 1-2 punch with those really dynamic wingers, dynamic in different ways, but dynamic all the same. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the second line in particular. And then because of what they do with the second line, what then happens to the third line. I've circled the absence of Mason Appleton a couple times, and people kind of laugh at me for that one. Not that I think Mason Appleton is a player that you necessarily need to write home about, but there's no denying the fact that he's taken up a massive chunk of ice time from that forward group. So the replacement of what they do with those, 16 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time per game, like there's a lot of variable there, right? So we could talk about that all we want with whether that was the right decision or not from the team's perspective, but it's a spot that needs to be filled. So it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens there. And I know what the Winnipeg Jets are going to get from Mark Scheifele. I know what the Winnipeg Jets are going to get from Kyle Connor. But the question is, are they going to keep Gabe Vilardi with those players and then have an absolutely brand new second line of Cole Perfetti and who's to say Jonathan Toews, Gustav Nyquist? We don't really know. There's a ton of questions about what's going to happen there because you can't win with just one line that scores goals. So I'm very fascinated to see what they do with the second line, and then I guess it's kind of all connected, and then because of that, what happens with the third and the first.
Yeah, fair enough. So I think for me, one of the biggest questions for the Jets specifically is just who the second line center is going to be. And I'm curious to know, like, at the end of the year, like when we're looking at this team in April, let's say, who do you project will be the second line center on this team? And you can go off board. Like, you can say Sidney Crosby if you really want. But
wish list,
like,
or
if you had to bet on who the 2C is going to be in Winnipeg by the start of the playoffs, what would be your bet?
Well, I'm going to take it from a bit of a different angle first. I'm going to say to start the season, the second line center is Jonathan Toews. I think a lot of people had some questions about, whether or not that player was being brought into more of a depth role or whatever you're going to have. To start the season is Jonathan Toews. I think that there's pretty much no denying that at this point based on how everyone in and around the team has been talking about that addition to the lineup. And then I'm going to flip the question again because last year the second line center kind of was the Vlad Nemestikov line, whatever, on paper. But as we're all aware, Adam Lowry was the center who played the second most minutes behind Mark Scheifele. So I anticipate that when he comes back from injury, which currently it's sounding like his prognosis is that he'll be back earlier than everyone thought because of the hip surgery he had this summer. I believe that in the spring, Adam Lowry is going to be the center that plays the second most minutes on this team. And then after that, to actually answer your question and avoid being around the bush for much longer, I'm going to go with probably Vlad Nemesnikov at that point. I think that Jonathan Toews, I'm really not sure what to think of that one, what to make of it at this point. I really need to go out to camp over the next couple of weeks and sort of see for myself, watch him in game action. There's just, I can't, pencil in a 37-year-old who hasn't played professional hockey in a couple seasons, right? And say that he's a surefire second line center on a Stanley Cup contending team. I just don't have the confidence yet. My mind could be changed, but I think at the end of the day, there's a little bit more of a sure thing with Vlad Nemestikov. Very, very low ceiling with that one, but I think that there's also a lot less risk. So I wouldn't be surprised if come that time of the year, he's playing that role for the team. But if it's Jonathan Toews, I will be pleasantly surprised because that means, kind of back to one of the earlier questions you mentioned, that means he hits, right? If Jonathan Toews is the second line center in the spring, that means that addition hit for the team, which would be huge for them.
Yeah. So finally, is there a player on the Jets? Like everybody talks about like the Connor Hellebuycks and the Josh Morrisseys of the world, but is there a player on the Jets that you personally want people to kind of key in on as like a player that you really like and that doesn't get enough attention?
Yeah, I think there's a few of them, but one that I think in my head has almost become overrated is the wrong word, but we talk about him much more than I feel like teams talk about their second line shutdown defenseman or whatever. But Dylan Samberg is a guy that I love to bring attention to people who are maybe a little bit less clued into the Winnipeg Jets market. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. It's just, there are 32 teams in the league. Not everyone's going to be paying attention to what Neil Pionk's defense partner does. But Dylan Samberg is one of my favorite players to watch because, in my opinion, defensemen can be really difficult to evaluate when it comes to defending because defending is all about what you don't let happen. And you can talk about playing defense in your own zone, but if you break up plays from happening from even getting there, it's hard to evaluate in the same way, right? And it's just the cyclical thing of how do you evaluate defensemen? How do you watch a hockey game and understand what a defenseman is doing well? Dylan Sandberg is a type of player that if you were to watch him over the course of the game, I think that he is one of the best examples of understanding how a defenseman should play hockey. He is unbelievably incredible at breaking up plays on his own blue line. The way he tracks the rush is super, super impressive. And I think he's a little bit underrated offensively. I really like the way that he kind of manages playing with the stylistic partner that he has in Neil Pionk. They're a really interesting pairing to watch. And Neil Pionk, while he is a flawed player, he's definitely like a high risk, high reward sort of guy. So in the situations where he's kind of more on the high reward side of the coin there, it's really, really interesting to watch kind of how they manage one another and how they kind of play off of each other's strengths. Dylan Sandberg is a player that if I could, tell any person who's wanting to learn more about, whether it's being a defenseman yourself, like learning how to play defense or just understanding what it means to play away from the puck, he's a guy that I would clue people in on for sure. And I think that he's been getting a little bit more love in some of the, more underrated defenseman circles and stuff like that. But he's still a guy that I think deserves a little bit more love.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Dylan Sandberg was good enough last year that he got Neil Pionka an invite to the U.S. development camp, or U.S. Olympic camp. So shout out to Dylan Sandberg for that. I'm a big Dylan Sandberg fan too, so I will beat the drum for him for as long as I can. Yeah, that's all I got for you. For this, the floor is now yours. You can plug whatever you feel you want people to see from you.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said kind of at the beginning of this, love talking about Winnipeg Jets hockey. I love kind of cluing into a team for a long period of time and getting to know them, getting to know how they work and how they play off of each other, their tendencies, their habits, and all that sort of stuff. And so I get to learn about all that in depth with the Winnipeg Jets. So over the course of the season, myself and my co-host on Winnipeg Sports Talk Sunday Live, our weekly show, we really dive into all those different things that we kind of skim the surface on today in a lot more depth. And, we're happy to sit here and talk about Morgan Barron's face-offs and all these different things. We'll dive into the most ridiculous stuff for the longest period of time because this team is so fascinating. There's so many layers to it. So if you ever want to learn a little bit more about what's going on with the Winnipeg Jets, a little bit deeper than what we just covered today, you can always check us out on Winnipeg Sports Talk.
All right. Well, thank you so much for stopping by, and it should be a fun season. The Jets are once again a very fascinating team, obviously with the President's Trophy winner and obviously Connor Hellebuyck as well. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle a Central Division that I think is going to be pretty tight.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun division. I'm looking forward to the season.
All right, so there you have it. Thanks again to Alyssa for joining us to talk about the Jets, and thank you for watching. We have 6 more of these to go, but like I've been saying the whole time, there's plenty of content coming throughout the rest of the season, or throughout the entire season, so subscribe for that. If you like the video, leave a like. Let me know what you think of the Jets down below. I think they're another fascinating team here at the top of the league, and I think as we go through this, there's going to be major flaws on pretty much every team in the NHL, and that's why I think this is such an interesting year, as it was last year. So, I rip on these teams at the top, but I mean the issues that I have with a team like the Jets are far less, massive than they would be for some of the teams at the bottom. But anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll see you for team number 6.